1 second, I got a little coffee here. Okay. So, the introduction to Cardboard Meditation states that there are a lot of interesting baseball stories out there. And this channel documents those using the wonderful cardboard slabs we've all come to love. But while I was thumbing through some old cards the other day, I came across a card that the documented baseball story that this represented wasn't really all that happy or funny. In fact, it was really quite sad. And then I wondered how many other baseball players suffered the same fate. Did a little research and found that actually there were quite a few. So this edition of Cardboard Meditation is going to be something a little different. It's going to deal with some violent behavior. Yeah. So please accept this portion of the story as a disclaimer. If you're subject to anxiety or trauma when seeing a story that contains violent content, it's okay to skip this video. Like the big boys say, viewer discretion is advised.
Hey, baseball fan. Time for a little self-care and a few minutes of cardboard meditation. Welcome to the show that features some of baseball's oddest stories and the cardboard slabs that document them. Find peace and joy through baseball cards with your host, the big guy.
So I found this card this week, and it was the 1976 Lyman Bostock Jr. card. And knowing the story behind it, I tried to find an uplifting angle while stumbling across this card. I wondered about other cards. I thought, what other cards does Lyman have? Because he wasn't around very long. And I found out that he has a lot of food issue cards. And I thought those would be pretty cool to see. So here are a few. Now, he was a young player, just starting to come into his own when this senseless act of violence ended his life. You see, Lyman was murdered while riding as a passenger in a vehicle in his hometown of Gary, Indiana. Back when I first heard about this story, I heard that Lyman was driving around with a woman in his car that wasn't his wife. And, I felt that, man, you got to expect stuff like that if you're going to behave like that. But that is not what happened. On September 23rd, 1978, the California Angels, Lyman's team at this point, just played the Chicago White Sox. Right after the game, Lyman met up with his uncle, who drove him around town while he was in town. He did this pretty often when he came to Chicago. And Lyman's family loved it when he came to visit. So before I tell you the rest of the story, let me tell you about the quality of the character of this man. Now, at the end of the 1977 season, Lyman became a free agent, an historic free agent because he went from making $20,000 a year with the Twins to making $2.3 million with the California Angels. Now, shortly after signing, Bostock donated $10,000 to a church in his native Birmingham, Alabama, so they could rebuild their Sunday school. Now, early in the first season, he struggled hitting only .150. He was a little embarrassed because he knew he was better than that, and so he decided to meet with team management. He tried to return a portion of his salary because he felt like he hadn't earned it. You really like this guy, don't you? Yeah, me too. Angels GM Buzzy Bavasi said that he came into my office and told me he was reluctant to take his salary. Lyman said, I'm not doing my job. But I told him, and that being Buzzy, said, I won't let you do that. And Lyman asked why not. So I told him, if you hit 600 next month, you're sure as hell not going to get any money out of me. So I think I like Buzzy too. So what did Bostock Jr. do? Well, he donated his April salary to charity. After his poor April, Bostock hit .404 in June and was hitting .296 when he was killed in September. He was leading the Angels in hitting. Well, back in Chicago, he visited his uncle, Thomas Turner, as he regularly did while he was in Chicago. And after eating a meal with a group of relatives at Turner's house, Bostock and his uncle went to visit Joan Hawkins. Now, this was a woman whom Bostock had tutored as a teenager, but hadn't seen her for several years. After the visit, Turner agreed to give Hawkins and her sister, Barbara Smith, a ride to their cousin's house. Turner, as the driver, Hawkins in the front passenger seat, and Bostock and Barbara Smith rode in the back seat. Barbara Smith had been living with Hawkins while estranged from her husband, Leonard Smith. Leonard had at this time been stalking her and saw the group leave the house. Leonard didn't know Bostock, but when he saw him get into the back seat with his wife, he thought the two were having an affair. And at 10:40 p.m., while at a traffic light, Leonard Smith pulled alongside them, where Leonard leaned out of his vehicle and fired a round from his shotgun into the back seat, hitting Bostock in the head and Barbara Smith in the face. He stated that his target was actually his wife. Lyman died 2 hours later. Barbara Smith was hospitalized in fair condition with pellet wounds to her face. Smith, the shooter, was tried twice for murder, but eventually not found guilty by reason of insanity. He later was sentenced to a psychiatric hospital and released after 7 months. Here is that 1976 Topps card I found. It's really sad that he was removed from his family, removed from his team, and I feel that the world really lost a man of deep character. And I wanted to share this with you. This is one of the Negro League postcards that were created. And you can see right here, it's autographed by Lester Lockett. But this guy right here at the far upper right is Lyman Bostock Sr. He played in the Negro League. And just to show you that Mr. Lyman Bostock Jr. came from good stock. Okay, people absolutely loved Luke Easter. Now, it was said he was born in St. Louis. The 6'5", 250-pound power hitter is believed to have hit the longest home run ever at Cleveland's Municipal Stadium, a 477-foot blast in the upper right field stands. That's a poke. Before playing with the Indians, Luke played in the Negro League and once hit a home run that was truly legendary, a 475-foot bomb into the center field bleachers at the Polo Grounds. Now, only Joe Adcock and Lou Brock ever achieved that. Some say he was as good as Babe Ruth. Okay, Luke was loved by Clevelanders. Yeah, he had a little gambling problem and wasn't too forthcoming about his age or where he was even born or his real first name, which was Lucius. Luke didn't even play professional baseball until he was 32 years old, but his raw abilities and his power were considered positive influences, helping develop players like Boog Powell and Kurt Blefary. After his playing days were done, Easter played in the minors for a decade and even became a fan favorite in Buffalo, and then retired in 1964 at 48 years old. He coached for a while and later became the chief union steward at TRW, an electronics factory in Cleveland. And as part of his duties, he would cash payroll checks for the employees, bringing their pay back for them. Usually he went with a police escort, but on the day in 1979, he decided not to, and that proved to be a tragic mistake. When Luke came out of the bank, 2 robbers came up on him and shot him in the chest with a sawed-off shotgun and then robbed him. Luke died on his way to the hospital. 4,000 fans came to his viewing. 1,000 fans came to his funeral. Cleveland's Luke Easter Park has a 7-foot-high bust statue of Easter on a pink granite pedestal, smiling and wearing his Indians uniform. Here is his 1953 Topps card. This is the way I like to think about the big, powerful guy, leaning back, laughing while playing the game he loved. Okay, so if you've never heard the stories about the first 2 guys here, you're going to probably be familiar with this next story, even if you don't know the ball player. Do you remember the book, or better yet, the movie, The Natural? Well, that part in the movie where Robert Redford's character, Roy Hobbs, gets shot by a mentally ill fan, well, actually, that happened. It happened to this guy, Eddie Waitkus. On June 14th, 1949, the Phillies played the Cubs at Wrigley Field. Waitkus, playing for the Phillies, had a single, a walk, and scored twice as the Phillies beat the Cubs 9-2. In the stands that day was a 19-year-old woman named Ruth Steinhagen. Steinhagen stayed at the Edgewater Beach Hotel, the same hotel where the Phillies stayed. She registered as Ruth Ann Burns of Boston. She went to the hotel room after the game, and Waitkus went to the restaurant to have dinner with friends. While he was out, Steinhagen tipped the bellhop $5 and asked him to deliver a note to Waitkus. When Waitkus returned, the bellhop informed him that a woman had left him a note. The unsigned note asked Waitkus to come to room 1297A. I'm quoting here. The note states, "It's extremely important that I see you as soon as possible. I have something of importance to speak to you about. I think it would be to your advantage if you let me explain to you. Who wouldn't want to know what was going on with that? Waitkus asked the desk clerk to tell him who was registered in 1297A. Well, he informed that Ruth Ann Burns of Boston, and Waitkus wondered if it could be a relative. Waitkus called Steinhagen's room. He asked, "What's all this about?" Steinhagen said to the International News Service later. "I told him it was important that I see him, but can I see him tomorrow? He couldn't make it and asked, how about tonight?" Waitkus agreed to come up to the room in 30 minutes. So Waitkus entered the room briskly. 30 minutes later, 11:30, walked into the far corner of the room and sat down in an armchair. As Waitkus settled into the chair, Steinhagen reached into the closet for a rifle. She had snuck it into the hotel, wrapping it in a newspaper and a traveling bag, and pointed it right at him and told him to stand near the window, the Chicago Tribune reported. "I thought it was a practical joke," Waitkus said. "I thought the players had planned it, but he noticed she had the coldest-looking face I ever saw," he said. "I have a surprise for you," Steinhagen told Waitkus. "You are not going to bother me any more." "What have I done?" Waitkus pleaded. Well, Steinhagen shot him in the right side of his chest at a range of 5 feet. The bullet pierced a lung, ripped into the thick muscle in his back, and lodged near his spine. Waitkus slumped to the floor and rolled onto his back and said, "Oh, baby, why did you do that?" Soon after, a hotel detective arrived and found Steinhagen. Waitkus was rushed to the hospital, and Steinhagen was arrested. Authorities found the shrine to Waitkus in her home, and she was heartbroken when Eddie was traded by the Cubs to the Phillies. It was determined that Steinhagen was either schizophrenic or in deep influence of major hysteria, Dr. Edward Kelleher, director of the Municipal Court Psychiatric Institute, said. On June 30th, 1949, just 2 weeks after the shooting, Steinhagen was arraigned on a charge of assault with intent to commit murder, indicted on the charge by a grand jury and found insane by a jury. Chief Justice James McDermott of Criminal Court in Chicago committed Steinhagen to a state mental health hospital. Waitkus spent a month at a Chicago hospital before returning to Philadelphia. Then in November, Waitkus went to Clearwater Beach, Florida, and underwent a grueling 3-month program to get physically fit to play baseball. By the time the Phillies reported for spring training in Florida, back in February 1950, Waitkus was ready to join them. Eddie Waitkus fought in combat in World War II, returned home to resume his Major League Baseball career, only to be nearly killed by a 19-year-old mentally ill superfan. His son, Eddie Waitkus Jr., told the Denver Post the shooting was an emotional part of his father's life. His nerves were shattered for a while. Now, here is his 1949 Bowman card. He's a tough little ball player, isn't he? Well, thank you for watching today. You know, with stories about crime and violence, and especially mental illness, it's important to reach out and get help if you need it. Perhaps find some happiness. You know, nobody is going to provide you with happiness. You've got to bring it yourself. So bring it with baseball cards. Remember to like and subscribe. Thanks.
Cardboard Meditation helps set your mind right. Thank you for watching. Show us your appreciation by clicking the like and subscribe button. Ring the bell while you're at it so you'll know when we upload a new story.